So welcome, Chris. Welcome, John. I'm excited to be here. Well, excited, is that the right word? Because we're talking about this COVID crisis. But I just realized that on this podcast, we have teamed up the head of a great educational institution and entrepreneur with a guy who's known for comedy and being successful in business. How does that match? Anyway, we won't have to match up. But if you guys can do like a brief intro, although you've been on the show before, just some brief, let them know, and then we'll dive into this thing. And what should leaders be doing now in this crisis?
All right. Hey, I'm John Jackson, the president of William Jessup University, and I think higher ed is hilarious. So I think there's the good comedy connection. But we are in a very serious hour, and I can't wait for the conversation because I want to learn a lot from you folks. But I think leaders now, this is your moment to traffic and hope.
All right. Great to be here. My name is Chris Tabish. I am author of the book Comediology, co-founder of Venture West Consulting. And for reference on the Zoom, I'm sitting in the Greg Brady box. So in case you guys are wondering, but I'm excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Okay. So where do you guys want to start? I mean, I just got a call canceled a couple hours ago, well, postponed, from a client in New York. Apparently New York State has gone into what we have here in Placer County. What do you call this, John? I can never remember this. It's not stay at home, but
it's shelter in place.
Shelter in place. It sounds so correct.
Yeah.
And I did hear someone say that Governor Newsom, was fighting the hecklers back, that this is not martial law. Stop referring to it as martial law.
Well, let me take a stab very quickly. First of all, there are people who have died. I think a couple hundred as of the recording of this. Who knows where it will go? And there are thousands of people who are sick. So on the one hand, I don't want to underplay in any respect. This is a very serious issue, and we pray for and encourage all the families and communities, especially our hospital, first responders, anybody working in the health field. We just really a crisis moment. We want to respond well. At the same time, I think that this whole shelter in place thing has different levels as I understand it. I'm no lawyer. I have stayed in a Holiday Inn Express one time, but I'm not a lawyer. Chris, I thought you'd get that more quickly. Okay, so at any level, shelter in place is a directive in Placer County, which means we're giving you guidelines. We're asking you to be socially responsible. The state of California now has given an order, which means that it is legally enforceable. If they if they see a business, if they see people who are just literally egregiously breaking the law, they do have the force of law. But my understanding from the governor's office is that they're not taking that approach. They're not sending police out to enforce this. So it's shelter in place, hopefully just wise social management during this season. In the same way, by the way, if we had a hurricane, we don't have those here. If we had tornadoes, we don't have those here in California, at least, but those would be the kind of orders that would happen or directives that would happen during those time periods.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as this has unfolded over the past, 3-4 weeks, to listen to people on both sides of the spectrum where, I agree with you. Our hearts go out to anyone who's lost someone to this disease. And as much as the rebel in me hates this shelter in place thing, okay, I have to agree that it makes sense for a certain time frame to try it out. But my heart also goes out to all these people where, their job is shut down, whether it's restaurant, hotels, hospitality, events, all these different things. And we haven't really been a nation that's trained people how to save for a rainy day. We've been a nation that's encouraged people to go out and spend on your pleasures. And so this puts people in a lot of tough spots, and my heart goes out to them.
Yeah. And I think, first off, I'm really grateful that I might have a law degree since I did stay at the Holiday Inn too. I didn't realize that. So thanks. But I think you said it well. I think there's a lot of macro information out there, but a lot of, there's very little information on how to apply that to your life. I think when I talk with professionals and I meet as the days have gone past, I feel like people are overwhelmed and under socialized. I mean, aside from the people who have really been ill and had to be at the hospital, et cetera, but just your kind of day-to-day people dealing with this. I feel like there's really a lack of information. It's kind of, shelter in place, but what does that mean for your daily life? And I feel, I think people are realizing how important a routine is, how important socialization is, and seeing the effects of that. And this is, maybe week one, but after the weeks continue, it'll be interesting to see the cumulative effect on people. We should expect zombies after week 3. I mean, maybe not to that effect, but I think obviously there will have an impact.
I love your insights there, Chris, because I think there is the macro, the micro, and then there's the duration issue. Is this a 2-week issue? Is this a 2-month issue? I'm in the education sector now. I came out of the church sector. But you think about this reality, are schools going to close for 3 weeks? That's what we thought at the beginning. One school district here in the region locally closed a week before the governor's order. So they thought they were going to be on a 4-week break. Well, now the question is, it looks like it's going to be through the spring for the K-12 schools in California. So my question is, now that you've closed, when do you reopen? Because when you reopen, you're saying to all the children and all the parents, we're safe now. I think that's an infinitely harder decision than the decision to close. And so the macro issues of what happens to our economy, what happens to healthcare, those are massive, huge issues across the sector of the United States. But then, as Chris said, boy, the micro issues. What does it mean when I'm at home with my little kids? What does it mean when I'm at home with just, myself or others? What does it mean when I've got aging parents that maybe I'm helping to care for or that I'm concerned about? How do I occupy my time if I'm not 8 hours at a desk? 2-wage earner households, all those issues, huge implications. And I've got some theories on that, but I love this conversation.
Yeah, and I know someone who went out yesterday, the day before, went on a walk with a friend, came back, and their roommate, who has some health challenges, just freaked out, because the roommate's in this bubble of living in the house and then being fed all the news from the media, which the majority of which is negative. And I'm not saying it's untrue, but emphasize the negative. And then it's like, oh, you were out, number one, and you were near any human. Oh, it's terrible. And that stress has got to get worse if people isolate versus connect.
Before we move to that, can you, sorry to take over the moderator role, but Chris, say something about discipline, because that word is super important. If I'm at home now 8 to 12 hours a day, what does discipline look like, and what does that have to do with anything? Because I think that's actually a super important part of self-care.
Yeah, it is really interesting. They and I'm actually really grateful for a lot of the things the private sector is doing. For example, LinkedIn published a work at home, their work at home tips and sort of a how to work at home. I know that some of the things that they talk about are, having a routine every day, waking up, taking a shower, if you're into that kind of thing. And then, but kind of on a regular basis, like doing those same things that you would do as you go to work, but instead you're working from home, having your space, having that different from the space that you work in, and even scheduling times when now you have children, like yelling at you when you're on a conference call. Like those are things that you have to deal with. And so scheduling time with them, making personal space, you kind of take it for granted having a distance away from where you work at home, but now it's kind of putting those structures and rigor and yes, discipline in place to keep you sane. But you don't think about that. You don't just work from home, but there's a lot of actual mental health that constructs that you can go put into to make you sort of more effective and more fulfilled on the back end.
And I wouldn't want to overlook this, Dave, and I'll be quiet after this, but sort of. But Dave, you've had a unstructured, when I say unstructured, I mean you've been a freelance consultant, very remote work for a number of years, and my perception of you is that you've mastered that. What have you learned after all these years working outside the corporate world? You've been outside the corporate world for years. What have you learned having a home office and that sort of thing?
Oh, that's right. So for 14 years, I've had a mix of a home office or a small office and splitting time at home. For I don't know how many years it's been mostly at home. Think like Jeff, you would know. I mean, it's been like 3 years, has it? Something like that.
Yeah,
Last 3 years.
it's been a good mix of both.
Yeah, yeah. So I think what you just brought up, the discipline piece. So let me mention up front one of the pieces that you didn't mention, although you might have alluded to with the shower comment, is that when you're working from home and that alarm goes off, I don't know, maybe you're one of those people that just wakes up, but the alarm goes off. Quite frankly, even in this crisis, like this morning, I'll be candid with you, I was just like, I don't want to get up. There's so much negativity going on. I mean, we teach leadership, we teach culture, we teach hiring. One of my specialties. I interviewed somebody for a client today who's going to take advantage of this situation and maybe scoop up a superstar. But there's not a lot of hiring going on, and not a lot of people that are investing in culture and leadership type of thing. They're just trying to survive. So one of the things you've got to do, I think, is have a daily check-in where you're like, okay, what's the thing that I need to get done today that's going to make me feel good that I got something meaningful done?
Yeah.
I think that happens during regular times, but it especially happens now. And then, I use a small little app, Toggle, that's a time thing where I can keep track of where I spend my time during the day. And then I've got to make certain I put in a good 7-8 hour day because I don't track my breaks. So I know I put in the time, and then I have to focus. And if I need to do little brief check-ins during the day. Am I staying on track, or am I going down rabbit trails? In other words, am I looking at the news on COVID every 15 minutes? You got to clear out the notifications that are on your laptop and on your phone. You can't have news flashes coming up. Or quite frankly, I would suggest you can't have the emails popping up either.
Yeah. And that is just to highlight that is one of the things they talk about is checking the news twice a day. I mean, it just becomes overwhelming if it's a lot of these people, like my wife, for example, she's like, the news is constantly on, and it just is this overwhelming red status constantly in your face. And it's really hard to get positive and feel uplifted. And when so it's limiting that. I just wanted to acknowledge that. I think that's a really good point you're bringing up.
Yeah, so I don't mean to take over Chris's job with comedy, but let me say this. The news is like baking soda. A couple teaspoons at a time is probably a good thing, but don't be constantly putting it in your gut, because you're going to not cure yourself. You're going to make yourself sick.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. And I think, and the other thing, so I think that's really one of the disciplines. I mean, when I came out for a late lunch, it was like 1:30, 1:45. And my 13-year-old daughter said, well, what did the stock market do today? And I said, I don't know. I haven't even looked, and that's just much healthier for me,
And you call yourself an adult? What's going on? Get down and give me 20.
I'd like to get your perspective on something else. And that is, I heard somebody speak recently, I forget who it was, but they commented on this connected world that we have. We as a society are actually more disconnected than we ever have been, because we are here with the phone in our face. We are watching TV or whatever. And I'm just wondering if one of the things that could possibly be a positive out of this is maybe more people will be forced to do FaceTime or do other things, call people and check in and reach out to people that in the months and years up to this, it was, they forget, they're too busy, it's not a priority, whatever. And maybe we can reestablish some of those connections and some bonds and build a little bit out of this.
Well, if I could take a stab at that, part of my role as a college president and part of my role in my previous world, entrepreneurship and pastoring, is sort of teaching systematically. So very quickly, 3 words, they all start with the letter R, reveal. I think part of what this whole chaos situation is doing is it's revealing family, organizations, economies, governments. It's revealing, and some of what it's revealing is, oh my goodness, we've gotten so 24/7, always connected, always on, and yet we're feeling disconnected. So maybe this is the time. I've seen more people taking walks at appropriate social distance, people riding their bikes, people thinking about, like, I saw a couple moms and their kids walking around, and then I saw a dad, and then I saw people out, so it's just, so I think it's revealing. I think, second of all, there's a reset. So I don't know if this is going to be 60 days or 6 months, and I don't know how long the effects of it will last in our economy. I have real concerns about that, but I think there's a reset, and the reset is, you know what, I'm going to do things different. Guy who does plants here at our school, he's been doing it for a couple of years. I stopped him in the office. We were talking at appropriate social distance, and said, hey, by the way, what's your name? I'm horrified to admit to that, but he always comes in when I'm on the phone. He always comes in when I'm doing something else, and I'd never asked his name. So I asked his name.
His name is you there.
You there. Exactly. That's how it felt. And he was, guy with a phone in his ear type thing. But so we talked, and then he said, I'm really concerned about restaurant workers. He said, all my restaurants are closed. He said, I'm fine. I have some reserves. And so I said to him, maybe, in the reset, part of what we'll all do is say, everybody needs some reserves. Everybody who can, we need to, that's part of the reset. And then the last word, by the way, is reentry. You remember 9/11? That's the parallel from my life that I'm trying to point people to. Some things changed forever, after post 9/11. Other things, we forgot all about 9/11, and we kind of are reset and reentry. We didn't change those things, and now we're learning again what things need to kind of be revealed, what things need to be reset, and then how do we re-enter.
Hey, John, just for the remainder of the podcast, could you do me a favor and get more organized and talk faster? It just,
yes,
really, I was pretty impressed. I was like, wow, that's like bulleted form. Well done.
Hey, thank you so much. But you know what? Usually when I do this at the end, then I ask people for money. So Chris, if you feel compelled, right now to give.
But I think, John, you and I have talked about this previously. It's a really interesting thought, this reset piece, and what will change, because we've talked about the U.S. education system and what would happen if the system changed, where it actually taught kids how to manage money, how to have that reserve, how to work on teams. It taught them leadership skills. It taught them communication skills. It taught them to understand the strengths and weaknesses in their behavior and how to discern truth. We got all this news media and different things, and they need to learn that just because something's written online doesn't mean it's true. How do you evaluate that?
Wait. Is that true? If I read it online, it's not automatically true. Wow. Okay. I'm learning.
You got to write it down yourself, and then you read it.
Okay, good. That's it.
No, I think that's brainwashing. You write it down and read it and repeat it and mantra,
That's good.
But it would be, I don't know that it's going to go that deep. But, one of the things I thought of too is, one of the concerns with the crisis is that we're going to overwhelm the hospitals, like happened pretty much in Italy. And so, one of the thoughts is that my sister-in-law used to be a hospice nurse. That hospice structure works really effectively. So are there some things to look at of, if we run into another crisis in the future, we can develop some better systems where more people can get great care at home through a limited support network and don't have to fill the hospital beds that not only have that virus affecting some people, but also, people that have lung problems and heart problems and, other things going on.
Well, I think what you're talking about, and what I really think is key, David, is the new normal, right? Because I think there will be residual things, and just like the example you gave, 9/11. So then we had TSA agents, and we had checks at security and airports, and you couldn't carry on liquids, and there will be some things that we don't like and some things we do like about this new normal. I think Zoom, this will be one people probably connect more in video. I think there will also be healthcare, how we do healthcare, where we do healthcare, And I also think, because one of the things they talk about is connecting. Connecting is so important. I think you alluded to that earlier, David. And one of the recommendations they have is conference calls aren't good enough. When you're sequestered and you're out there, you got to have video. You got to have some that type of connection. I think that this will perpetuate. And this, and I don't know about you guys, but I use Kaiser. They actually have video calls now. So they're offering video calls. And so I think healthcare, I think connection, I think we will have a new basis for normal coming out of this that will fill those impacts.
Let me address a couple of those because I think you're absolutely right, and I'll try not to be as systematic or talk as fast.
I thought it was great, actually. I just didn't have the acronym. So
there you go. So I think telemedicine that you just mentioned, or that sort of thing, it has been kind of marginal before. I think it's going mainstream. I think post whatever happens here, people are going to go like, I want access to that. I love what you said, David, about home care with hospice. Let's talk about education. Is traditional undergraduate, 18 to 24, you send them to a school, they're face-to-face, they're in dorms, they have parties and whatever, and they, do whatever they do, but it's all face-to-face. Is that going to decrease after this experience? It might, because most schools around the country have switched to online instruction, or the converse might happen. Maybe we so realize our lack of physical connectivity that we say, we got to figure out how to do physical connectivity without creating pandemic situations, and people will maybe have a greater longing than ever before to be physically connected. If I had to bet on that, I would say both are true. Video conferencing is going to be more popular, and people are going to say, I want to connect physically with people fairly close to me, 50-mile radius, 100-mile radius. If we can get together face-to-face, makes sense. If not, I want a video conference on a more regular basis instead of telephone conference, just audio only.
Yeah, I think commerce-wise, too, it has a lot of implications. I mean, just to give you an example, I work at San Francisco Comedy College. It used to be a very local, obviously, to San Francisco. Now it's like, hey, they're doing Zoom conferences instead of on a stage. Well, you can go anywhere doing that kind of, and so I think the businesses that are looking to that, I think there's a lot of great things that can occur. One of the other things I do want to talk about is just, I don't know about you guys, but it really impacted me, this event, that how vulnerable we are, how it just, we're so fragile that, and everyone, you watch movies and they go, it's the aliens, it's going to be another country, it's going to be something. And you're like, the flu? Really? This did all of this. And then you just realize how it's brought in me a profound sense of gratitude for what we've had all this time. And I know it sounds campy, but I'm curious to see your feeling about what this has done in terms of, one, how realizing how vulnerable, and two, making you feel grateful for, wow, I'm glad I have a home to come to, and my health, et cetera.
Wow, just personally, I deeply affected in the same way. I mean, I think about people who are very vulnerable. Obviously, I think about senior adults. I think about the homeless. I think about those vulnerable populations. But then also think about across America. How many millions of people today are sheltered in place, and whether that will grow. And you just think about the fact it was an unseen virus, flu-like, pneumonia-like, whatever the context is, and it's crippled the American and now global economy. Now, by the way, I always think out of every crisis come the seeds of innovation, restoration. We're going to find amazing things. Same thing you said, Chris. My daughter is a professional actor, and she said that on a regular basis, people previously have been sending in video auditions. She sees that now as the new norm, and she teaches at the college level at our school. She said, Dad, the college level preparation that my students in freshman and sophomore year are getting to do video auditions well. Like, I think I have some ceiling tiles and a window and bad lighting visible. She said in the future, that will not be acceptable for an actor submitting an audition. And she showed me on YouTube some professional actor auditions done just with their own phone camera, but in great lighting settings. And I think we're going to learn some new skills out of this crisis as we also acknowledge our vulnerability.
Yeah, I'm certainly going to hold off on that expensive home repair when all I need is a virtual background and save me thousands. I
good.
agree.
I'm here to help you. Yeah.
So I'm curious, guys. You guys have any opinions? Do you have any insights from people you know who, we've talked about, we don't know how long it's going to last, but if you had to have a hope or a guess, I mean, when do you think that we start to, are we, there's going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end? Are we in the middle? Are we still in the beginning? We're definitely not at the end. Where do you think we are?
Chris, you go first. So I can laugh at you.
Actually, Jeff, you've been quiet, and you've got the UFO to tap into for knowledge. So what do you think about it?
Great, thanks for throwing me that question. Right?
Yeah, we gave you the easy one. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Ooh, do I think it's the beginning, middle, or end? That's the question.
Well, yeah. Do you think it's the beginning, middle, or end? When, if you had to say, do you think that people are going to be able to come out of their houses again? And
well, I think it's really important for anyone, leaders, regular people, to be able to say, I don't know. And I mentioned this to Roderick Yap yesterday on a podcast we had, which was fantastic. I encourage anyone who's listening to check it out. Rod's just seems like a great guy, and he's got his head on straight. I think it's really important to be able to say, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if this is the beginning or the middle or the end. I don't know if it's going to end in 2 weeks or in 8 months. And
that's what I meant by Jeff. What do you think about? No.
Yeah. We don't know. And I think the most important thing right now is to try to, I hate to say it, but try to think positively, really try to think positively and not go into those modes of panic that people are going into. There's no reason to hoard toilet paper. That's ridiculous. There's no eggs at the grocery store. Every time I had to go there, I picked up the last. There were 3. At the second grocery store I went to, there were 3 6-packs left, and I got 2 of them, and I was like, yes. But
was that beer or eggs? Which
eggs.
I got lost.
Yeah.
6 packs of eggs. Okay, got it.
Maybe both. Depending on what I want to do later. But it was. It's like this is not the time.
Yeah.
Just relax. There's going to be stuff there tomorrow,
So let me take a stab at that, because I think what Jeff just said was so important, and that is living with ambiguity, tolerating uncertainty, and staying positive. What a life skill that is increasingly going to become. But to answer your specific question, David, since I know perfectly well exactly where we are.
Well, you're higher ed. Come on,
yeah, exactly.
You guys know everything, right?
Exactly. So this is what I would say. I've been leading our team at Jessup to manage for 14 days, 60 days, and then the unknowable future. The 14-day and 60-day orientation says, look, I got to get through the next several days. How do I stay positive, disciplined, upbeat? Leaders traffic in hope. You watch things every day. It changes multiple times a day. You can get obsessed by it. It's just a terrible process. You got to just manage for 14 days, 2 weeks. Most of these stay in place or shelter in place orders are through the first part of April. My gut tells me this. I think we're closer to the beginning than we think we are. And probably the next 60 days will be kind of challenging, let's say through April, maybe even through May. Warmer weather comes. Every doctor I've ever listened to, every report I've ever read, we will probably see a downturn of sorts in cases and et cetera. But then there's fear about what happens in the fall as we start getting colder weather. Could we see a reemergence? Globally, I've wondered if we're like South Korea and Taiwan and Singapore, all of which have had some minor reemergences, or are we like Italy and France and Iran? And I can't answer that question, but I can say this. I hope you don't mind. I'm a person of prayer, so I've been praying not to flatten the curve, but to break the curve. I really want to see through warm weather, through a vaccine, or through some extraordinary experience that we break this curve. But I think people ought to prepare themselves for the longer haul. I think that's the safer way, not to be pessimistic, but just say, look, this might be 6 months. It might be 18 months of economic impact. I don't think history would suggest to us that this is 2 weeks and done. I think this is much more, you think 2 weeks, you think 60 days, and then you think the longer term, which probably is at least 18 months or so.
Chris, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, a couple of things. I think one is that, Jeff, just going back to your point, I think the bad times wake you up to the good times you didn't realize you were having, you know, and so you kind of look back and you think, wow, I should have been happy at that moment. I think this is a reminder to stay present, you know, and John, you could be, you know, very well that I think that the timing makes sense. You have a short term, you have a medium term, and then an you know, foreseeable future. I think the only thing that I look to is what China's, maybe they started the end of 2019 and they carried into 3 months in, you know, something like that. 4 months is the best thing that I would think to go on. But I think there's different things that you do in those different, I like how you carve that out, John, those different periods of time. One of the things I think in that initial period of time is just keeping people positive and keeping people thinking about it is to connect with people. One of the things that, you know, that they talk about in these how to work from home, et cetera, is connecting as a manager, as a leader, as a friend, to reach out to people and connect. It doesn't do as good just to, people make up their own stories, and even just to connect on how long, asking the question, David, that you're asking, how long is it going to last? What do you think is happening? Without influence of the news, without scaring people, but actually exchanging information, new ideas, what opportunities, because as you said, John, there's opportunities in every, you know, issue that we have. It's the seeds of future growth and opportunity. So I think extending ourselves and reaching out will everything possible and keep us positive in this time. Obviously we don't know. I think those are pretty good estimates, but Jeff, sorry, just to circle that back. I think it is key, really key to what's happening right now and make the most out of it.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you throwing it back there and reinforcing that. Am I coming through? It's not switching to my video when I start talking.
Yeah, it is.
We hear you.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, it must be just.
It just takes a while for the millions of fans to clap, but we're hearing it.
That's it. Yeah, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. I need that ego boost every now and then. So I want to share two things that happened in my life. So the first one that happened is, I felt really, honestly, I'm kind of on the other side of the spectrum on this. I feel really strongly that a lot of the response to this, maybe I should live in Texas or Florida, John. You can explain the differences you're alluding to before the podcast. Yep. But I think the response to this is kind of ridiculous, personally. I understand the risks. Based on the data that we have right now, I think our leaders are not serving us well. And so I actually sent a letter to Mayor Garcetti, my representative, my senators, to President Trump. You know, I sent, there were emails. I didn't write out a hand letter, but it was just saying, hey, listen, I support the reopening of schools immediately. Tell people to get back to work. If you are seriously at risk of this virus, I encourage, you know, I think it's important to encourage those people to self-quarantine. And you know, a number of these points that I said that I just wanted to say, because I don't think anybody's saying this right now. We're all giving in to the fear and the panic, and just like Chris, you mentioned the news is flashing red and all the time. And I think one comedian talked about the news, and they said this is what the news is: problems. You know, it's like that's all it is, just danger, danger, danger. And that's how they make their money. And there's been 200 deaths related to COVID-19 in this whole span in the United States. Let's clarify that. You know, there's been about 5,000 worldwide.
Yeah, clearly there's good news. There's, you know, pollution is down 82%. Toilet paper revenue up 42%.
Yeah, exactly.
There's things.
Well, I don't think it's up 42%. I think toilet paper revenue is up about 500%.
Probably. Yeah.
I was just gonna draw a comparison. This year's influenza season has 20,000 related deaths.
Yes.
Or attributed deaths.
Yes.
So 1%. And
92.3%, according to the CDC, of the influenza People who were hospitalized for influenza had a prior medical condition.
That's right.
And the same is probably true for COVID-19 or coronavirus or whatever.
So I like what you're saying, Jeff. Actually, I really do. I don't think you're as extreme as you think. I try to read all the sides. So I've been following a couple debates that are happening nationally. Very well respected medical researchers. I'm not a doctor, but very respected researchers who are giving alternative scenarios. So I think this, that I would just say this, isn't the social reaction to this astounding? I remember War of the Worlds. Remember War of the Worlds, at least what happened, and like people thought it was real, and look at your alien microphone there, and you just wonder if it's real. So there we go. See, there you go. So, but I would say this, you look at people who are dying of these sort of more normative, annualized, malaria. You think of influenza, other kinds of things. So the question will be, if you're in New York and California, you have in my view, a governing philosophy. And by the way, I want to say this quickly. I'm not of Governor Newsom's political party. I'm a California resident. There's many of his political priorities that are horrifying to me. I do think in many respects, he's actually been pushing back on some aspects of the media who want to say the words martial law. They want centralized control. I think the media has gone off the rails in many respects. But if you're in New York or California, you're in states that have a governing philosophy that is for centralization of everything: education, health, public service, all kinds of public services. If you're in Texas and Florida, at least today, you're in states. Now, not, by the way, there's R pockets and D pockets in every single state. So if you're in New York and you're upstate, it's different than if you're in New York City. If you're in Florida, there are D pockets like there are R pockets, but you're dealing with a political philosophy in Texas and Florida that is much more decentralized. So for instance, here in Placer County in California, this isn't a county that has a strong county presence, a strong city presence. And we kind of look at the state, it's only 18 miles away, and go, whatever, that's the state of California. We're going to mind our business right here in Placer County. I think that's what you see in Texas, and I think that's what you see in Florida. So responses to health crises are going to be different depending on the governing philosophy and the social orientation of the state that you're in.
So what are those different things that are happening in Texas and Florida from what you've seen? So
Texas and Florida, I think, are much more distributed towards the county level. Which form of government governs best? The government that's closest to the people. Sorry for the political lecture, but family, then city, then county, then state, then federal government. Well, a lot of us are turning to the federal government, appropriately so, in time of a national crisis. So again, I'm not opposed to federal government taking the majority of steps, but a lot of people start with, I need the state to take care of me. I need the federal government to take care of me. And I don't think that's the way Texas and Florida, by and large, operate as a state unit.
Are there specific things that Texas and Florida are doing that California and New York are not doing, or vice versa?
Well, yes, I think that California and New York governors are some of the first in the nation to issue shelter in place as not just directives, but orders with force of law, not martial law yet, but force of law. Whereas to my knowledge, Texas and Florida have not done that. I think they've been much more, if I'm in Texas, I trust that Harris County, which by the way is more, if I can say D versus R, more D, Harris County is going to do what's best for Harris County. Now they're going to coordinate statewide resources, but I think they've been much less oriented to taking over the mantle of authority in Texas and Florida because they have less of a centralized governing philosophy.
Interesting. Yeah, I went out surfing this morning, and I got up real early just to make sure I could get there before the cops wake up. Yeah. Just in case. I don't want.
I don't think, by the way, as far as I know, police are not going to be enforcing these things. They're just trying to say, right, please do social distancing. I think, by the way, your solution, Jeff, is not radical because if Governor Newsom is right that 56% are going to be infected, part of what was going on in England, they've since reversed course, but prime minister there was saying, hey, we think that this is going to infect the whole population. It's actually good. We'll build up immunities for it. And then, again, huge controversy. But I think those are different philosophies and not wrong in terms of science. To me, the social experience that we're having is really fascinating to watch.
Hey, so John, so on that, the social experience and just getting something that's very close to home. So in addition to, buying toilet paper, like what are you guys going to do this weekend? I mean, I'm just genuinely curious, because I'm sure it's radically different than what was last weekend or the weekend before, right?
Yeah. So I'm not going to stay cooped up in my house the whole time. I promise you that. I'm gonna walk around. We have a family that's fairly close, within 15, 20 minutes of each other. And I know this will frustrate some people, but we've already had contact with this family. These are adult children with our grandkids. We've had contact with them repeatedly over the last couple of weeks. And we have no reason not, in our view, not to have repeated contact. We'll walk with them. We'll stay, some reasonable thing. One of my sons came in the house last night with a friend of his from school. They lived real close to us. But instead of hugging the kid and give him a handshake like I normally did, we did another form of greeting that did not involve physical contact. It was very cool, by the way. We invented it ourselves.
We don't get a demo?
No, you don't get a demo, because I want to be politically sensitive. Since I'm such a politically sensitive guy.
Lawsuit free. All right.
Yeah, lawsuit free. That's the goal. My name is Dave Russell, by the way. If you want to file a lawsuit, it's David Russell.
You can find me at the Holiday Inn.
Yeah, that's right.
So, John, have you studied Singapore very much, or any of these other countries that have successfully seemed to have, bypassed any serious impact, at least at the moment?
Yeah. So again, I'm not a medical expert. I'm not an expert at a lot of things. I have opinions on things I'm not an expert of. But my
that's why we have you on the show, John.
Thank you. My struggle with looking at South Korea and looking at Singapore and Taiwan, those three great examples, is they're largely homogeneous populations. They're very much willing to do massive testing. So Singapore, very controlled, very much massive testing. You're looking at the United States, 300 and something million people, very heterogeneous, multiple population styles, very spread out. We have urban, rural, suburban, all of that. I think it's just a radically different proposition. And that's why, again, I'm so much more oriented towards the county, the state, the city, county, state, and then the federal. I think the federal, by the way, marshaling the federal resources to make sure that we get masks and ventilators and pharmaceuticals. That's all, appropriate to cut through the red tape at the federal level. But I don't want the federal government telling me, and I actually don't want the state government telling me in my county how to operate unless they absolutely have to. I want the local government. So in those countries, David, I think they're using very homogeneous populations, very intensive things. And Chris, what makes me interested in China, but nervous about China, is that they literally shut down the national economy for, I think, about 45 to 60 days. And they're a single party, high control. I've been there twice, single party, high control setting. Can you imagine literally by force of law shutting down America for 2 months? Man.
Yeah, and I was watching video today in China, how they're spraying everything. And you're like, how well, that would not go over in America.
No.
Just like, what chemicals are those? And to the pregnant lady, like it just doesn't add up. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a different society. And so, like, Jeff, I don't think you're as crazy as you maybe have friends think you are. There are different approaches that are not unreasonable, but what flies in America does not fly in some of those other places.
Well, yeah, and I think that brings up, this whole the thing we haven't mentioned but have alluded to, that every action there's a reaction, and this whole thing of putting thousands, tens of thousands, well, actually hundreds of thousands of people out of work, if not millions, probably millions by now.
Millions by now.
Millions of people out of work. That's one thing if you want to do that for a week or two. But when you stretch that out to a month or you have some fantasy you're going to do that for 2 months or 3 months, it's and isn't that, forgive me, John, I don't want to go down a conspiracy theory path,
Yeah.
but isn't that one of the radicals' methods of getting control of the people, is that you make them so poor that then they rely on government?
Yeah.
And I'm
So
not saying anybody's doing that, but I'm just,
Yep.
it just occurred to me the other day. I was like, this is really kind of weird.
And I'm not a conspiracy theory person, but let me just say this. The governor on Sunday night said, hey, a bunch of our really smart higher ed people in California, and they are really smart, way smarter than me, closed down all their dorms, emptied them out. And guess what? We got foster kids with no place to go, and they end up in homeless shelters. That's crazy. That's a law of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
So now you shut down whole industries, you shut down restaurants, you shut down everything but, essentials, quote unquote. So the reality is, I think that it is a setup. In the worst case scenario, I pray it's not, but in the worst case scenario, you could say, okay, now we need the government to send me checks every month. I need the government to completely meet my needs, education, healthcare, et cetera. And that is not America. America is a land of innovation. It's a land of freedom. It's a land of creativity. Now, I'm not talking about insanity. There are laws for how you drive your car on the road. That's a privilege, not a right. And so we get that. But as we do that, I think we've got to be really careful. I trust the healthcare people. I really do. At the same time, I think we need to be wise and not allow our future to simply be locked in by governmental control. That's not America.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see the impacts. I mean, even just in this early phase. So there's my in-laws live in Oregon, and there's a pretty well-known chain. It's called McMinimans. They have restaurant, bars, many locations. They've already laid off 3,000 people, and probably the talk is that they'll close permanently. And you're like, that's after how many days of being on this shutdown? It's and you just think, Dave, like a month or 2 months, and just, I mean, it's crazy to even think about.
Yeah, and Jeff and I were talking about this. That this $1,000, we're going to send $1,000 to every American citizen or whatever. It's like, are you wealthy politicians absolutely clueless? I mean, $1,000. First of all, some people aren't going to need it. Like, you've got your gardening guy, who's been very wise and very prudent. Okay. And you got other people, even if they need it, how long is $1,000 going to last them if you're going to shut down, keep them from working for 2 months? So it's not going to do anything. Whereas at least they're doing the SBA disaster loan thing.
Yeah.
Although there will be an interest rate to it, although it might stretch over 30 years. But that's where I can see more of an impact. It's like with these businesses who still have to pay rent on all those buildings and other fixed costs, even if they don't have the employees. And flood the market to a certain extent, within reason, with some loans, no interest loans, just like you did when 2008, 2009, when things crashed, to help these businesses stay afloat. So when you get past your 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or whatever the time frame is, they can hire people back.
Yeah.
And not be buried. I mean, having that 3,000 people laid off, and that social gathering place, providing high quality, food, etc. Not being there for the community also. I mean, that's a real scare long term.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that maybe some of the things that were talked about initially, like reduce restaurant capacity by 50%. Okay, that makes a little bit of sense to me. Have some social distancing capacity. But to tell businesses you can't have your employees come to work, to tell restaurants you must close, how long do you do to that without permanently closing some, permanently crippling the economy? Wait till April 1st when people have to decide, do I pay my rent? Does the commercial building owner pay their rent with a business that's been shut down? Do people pay their mortgage? Now, by the way, I'm not trying to create panic. I'm just saying the law of unintended consequences may already be in effect as we think about the ripple effect of this. So as leaders, let me just say this. As leaders, we have to find a way to help people be wise, to be connected. I love your word there, Chris, to be connected to one another, to be wise. Let's be rational. Let's be clear thinking. But let's also be just really focused on hope and what can we do to build the future. I'm convinced some of the greatest inventions, some of the greatest creativity will happen out of this very difficult time period.
Yeah, it's really interesting, John. When you talk about that, it just made it crystallize in my mind. You almost have like, if this perpetuates, we're almost going to be forced with what's the lesser of two evils. So when behind box curtain number one, you have, okay, people get sick, and a certain percentage of the population will die because of this illness. Behind curtain number two is, I don't know, martial law. Are we hurting each other to get to food? Everyone is losing a job, and in addition to that, we're also getting sick and dying. It's like, wait a second. I mean, it'll be interesting to weigh those two at a very high level factors to come to a decision. But I think that's why we need to be very present with it, and it changes every day. And hey, maybe it isn't off course. Maybe you're right. Maybe we need to allow limited business, knowing that there's some risk out there.
I think that's exactly the equation. Thank you, Chris, for bringing that up. I think that's exactly that kind of equation that people are not looking at, especially the government leaders, the mayors, the governors, the president. Well, maybe the president is on the different side, but some of his advisors, is that in the long-term scheme of things, we talked about short-term, macro, micro, long-term. In the long-term scheme of things, what are these shutdowns? What is the effect of these shutdowns going to have? And I think you can take a look at our situation and realize that we're not China, we're not Italy, we're not any other country. We're unique in and of ourselves, just like every other country is unique. And we need to come up with a unique solution ourselves. And panicking and shutting down everything when you add up all the numbers does not make sense to me. When I see all the data, it just doesn't make sense, because the long-term effect of all these policies is going to disproportionately hurt the people that our politicians are saying they're trying to help. Yeah. It's going to hurt the poor people who can't make rent. Even if you give them $1,000 here and there for the extension of this crisis, if you give them $1,000 a month, guess what? If you just pump money into the economy, it's going to raise prices in the long term. And those poor people who need the money, who aren't good at managing their money, are screwed. 1 year, 2 year, 3 years down the line. I don't agree with that at all.
Now to a certain extent, we're armchair quarterbacking, but it does appear that they basically, our leaders were faced with a fool's choice. Okay, fool's choice. You have two bad options, but those are the only options. And you guys outlined the options. Chris, you did. Okay, and they chose this option. Okay. Whereas, John, what a beautiful thing you brought up. I had never heard of that until just now, of 50% seating in the restaurants, instead of and like, hey, what if they came out from day one? I mean, Mike Pence, I think, was put in charge of this thing, and I wish he could have handled it differently, where he would have said, okay, here's what we know, here's what we don't know. I'll be back to you tomorrow. Here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and just keep going. But what if the thing was, okay, we need everybody to volunteer. We need your help here. We need you to social distance. We need you to isolate. The restaurants stay open, but please cut the seating in half so you can separate people. What if we had done those types of things? Let's try this first where we are, because there's no real consideration of how badly people are being hurt by just shutting down everything and telling people, sorry, you can't work.
And we're not hearing those stories. You're right. We're not hearing those stories. Those aren't making it to the front page news.
Not at all.
I love the way you said that there's a false dichotomy that happens. It's, curtain A, curtain B, and you feel like those are my only two choices. When this first started, I said to our team at Jessup, there's a public health part of this, and then there's a public relations part of this. It was actually Governor Newsom, I'm sure smart people around him, who said, hey, what we're going to do is ask the restaurants to reduce their seating by 50%. We're going to close the pubs because you can't really do that. We're going to reduce seating by 50%. That seemed rational to me. On the other hand, the problem is that if you have a fundamental distrust of people, you basically feel like you have to control them. I come at it from a different perspective. I trust Americans. I trust people. Now, I know we all have people who are foolish and make terrible decisions.
Why are you looking at me, John?
Hey, because of the Greg Brady room, it just immediately drew my attention. So I trust Americans. I trust people. I heard of a story today. I'm going to tell it to you very rapidly. A story today of a local nursery operator, a plant nursery operator, who is donating 10,000 masks to the local hospital system. They use the mask for when they're spraying chemicals on all the plants in their nursery, whatever they are, and I don't understand all the details, but they're donating 10,000 masks. They're donating them to the hospital system in our local area. When is that story going to get on the news? It needs to be broadcast everywhere. And by the way, people are feeding their neighbors. People are making sure that the senior adult in their community is taken care of. That's what needs to be lifted up. And I'm convinced that's all over America. But if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead in the news media.
Yeah, there's a lot of money in crisis.
There is, sadly.
Yeah. So,
Chris, I want to circle back and throw it back to you. What are you doing this weekend?
Oh, good question.
Well, it's, I need to figure that out. We had, I was coaching Little League. I think we're going to finish the season on Wii Sports, so we're going to figure out how to do that. I really, asking in genuine, we need to figure it out as a family. We're like, do we go on a bike ride? Do we, now we have 4 bikes because one of our kids got older. So we'll probably go on a hike. But I think this is the good stuff. I think us getting together as a family and figuring out what we like, how, because you can only watch so much Netflix, and, it just, you have to connect, and that need to connect. And now we're family. We have to connect with each other as much as my kids probably would rather connect with their friends. But, I say that jokingly, but it really is. It kind of forces you to connect and figure out what you like to do as a family. So I think that's one of the good things. I don't know, but we will figure it out.
So what are you talking about? You teach comediology. Aren't you going to do like improv at home or do, live theater, or, let's go out on, well, you can't go out on the street and impact anybody. Let's call grandma and see if we can make her laugh. I mean, can't you do anything like that on FaceTime?
Come on, Chris. Your wife and kids do not laugh at your jokes. Tell us the truth.
Oh, no. They are the basis for my jokes. I mean, it's like, so just to keep it light, I actually had this situation. So last time we had a big family gathering. I found all the family was down there. There's a trash can, and I found a little toilet paper with a little poopy on it. And I go to my son. I'm like, "Are you wiping and then throwing it in the trash can?" And he looks at me all indignantly and he goes, "Don't look at me. I don't even use toilet paper." That's how he went digital, apparently.
There you go, man.
But David, to your point, we actually had a comedy show last night. We had a virtual comedy show, so it's something that people can dial into, and I'm trying to spread the word. To just have some fun, listen to some comedy. It's a little bit different than a regular stand-up, but I mean, it's free and you can participate, and it's a lot of fun.
Hey, send me the link. I'll send it out to our group. I mean,
I don't have the link, but I heard of a country singer who's doing, who's doing shows on the internet, and I've clicked on a few links of people doing great stuff. I think there's going to be amazing art, amazing community, amazing connection. Let's not despair.
Yeah. Well put.
Yeah. Okay. So, you want to end there, Jeff, or where do you want to go? Anywhere else you want to go? I mean, we're keeping these guys past the limit, but we're having fun, and I think we're bringing out some nuggets here for people to consider as they're facing this crisis.
Oh, I think it's great. Everything you guys have said is fantastic. I was actually looking through the list just to see kind of the topics we have that we thought of before this. And one of the things that sticks out to me is, we've commented on what people are doing now, or what we're doing, or how we're reacting, or how our government leaders are reacting. But we do have a lot of listeners who are business CEOs, executives. And I'm curious for, John and Chris, what would you guys say to them who are running their business, or even those who are having to lay off people in this time? What's your pieces of advice?
I got about 5 more minutes, and then I'm going to have to go because I've got a call that I was supposed to make at 4. But I can go about 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Go ahead,
John, why don't you go ahead and answer that first?
So 2 things. First of all, I know there are business leaders making super hard decisions, and I'm in the process of thinking about that. And I would just say, focus on your mission and your passion, focus on your people, and then I think you've got to look at markets and tools and innovation and creativity. When you have to make the hard decision, let's say you have to do a layoff. I promise you that restaurant owner that Chris was talking about earlier agonized over closing down those restaurants. It's a personal wound. And I'm sorry, this will sound political. It's not. I appreciate our president. But if you ever enjoy saying you're fired, if you ever enjoy saying, you're laid off, then you got a sickness. Something's wrong with you. It ought to hurt you. It ought to be painful. But for the sake of your business and for the sake of the future, you may have to make that tough choice. Make it with integrity. Look people in the eye to the extent that you can. Make it to the best of your ability. Fail forward fast. So when you make your decisions, make them to the best of your ability with good counsel. Make them positively and do it with integrity. And then second of all, I would say when you think about your business, I'm convinced this is a time of innovation. At Jessup, at my school, we're making decisions faster. I think we're making decisions better. And I think we're having greater conversation with greater numbers of people than ever before because we have to. What a gift that is. I'm excited that Chris is going to spend time with his family this weekend. And that is the redemptive reality of taking a walk and taking a bike ride. For a business, it's hard to do layoffs. That's the pain. The great news is your superstars are going to rise to the top. And it might be people whose names you didn't know 2 weeks ago, or who are 2 layers down, 3 layers down the organization. It's the time for them to soar.
Awesome. Time to get to know you there.
That's good. You there. That's right. Will. I know him. I know Will now.
That's well put, John. I think just to kind of, what's a bunny hop off that? Rabbit trail. I think connecting with people, I think there is, that's our superpower. I think if you're sequestered, then you could find yourself in a world where the news is the authority and that's all you hear every day. I think there's potential in conversation, potential in staying present. I think, Jeff, just like you said, is staying present and talking every day. And this is what we know, or sorry, John, maybe it was you. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. That's how we wrestle problems to the ground. That's how we have such a superpower when we connect. Hey, there's difficulty. There might be a chance of there's a layoff, but we're working it together. Here are some tools. Here are some recommendations. Make that extra effort to connect, whether you're a business owner, manager, your people is critical. Even just a friend reaching out to people, you have to go that extra mile to connect. If you don't, that's where people make up their own stories. That's where fear and anxiety creep in. So keep connecting, stay positive.
Love it.
I love the connection as a superpower. I would add, John, since I have had to lay off everybody in my company when my .com lost its funding because the funder was shutting down the fund, but did not let us know in advance. I would just add a couple words to that. Agree with everything you said about doing it with integrity. Be transparent, be open. Be open about how miserable you feel about it, why you have to make the decision. Be empathetic. Let people know that you really care about them, and they'll respect you for that. They'll know why you were forced into that corner and you had to make that decision. It does happen. It's not fun, but as you say, you can come out stronger. Jeff, you want to close us so John can move to his call?
Yeah, I think we're good to go. You guys got some great points in. Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks, John, for joining us. We really enjoyed this, and we'd love to talk to you more in the future.
Hey, thanks for organizing. Very timely, and pleasure being with you guys. Nice to meet you, John.
Thank you. Good to meet you, Chris. Thank you, Jeff and David.
Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
All right. Bye-bye.